On now, and then green is. It's on now.
Perfect.
Oh no, but you don't want it on now.
Actually, I can tell it's brighter.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I can see that there are still people coming in. It's wonderful to see a good audience again for one of these Smith conversations. I am going to, David, who is chairing this evening, has said you've got a maximum of 1 minute. And one of the things which we were told last night is that there wasn't quite enough Smith in the discussion. Now, I thought there was quite a lot myself, but maybe I'm just an academic who's used to looking for traces of it. I thought also that last night there was one or two questions which suggest people disagreed with the panelists, which was absolutely what we were looking for. This should be about debate and discussion. My name's Robbie Mockery. I've been organising this. Today's discussion is called Smith on Wealth, but which really we're looking at book 2, or ideas which come from book 2 of Wealth of Nations. I will just give you this little thought. Smith thought that every academic was unproductive. Thank you, Andrew. What did he think about bankers? Because we didn't really have investment managers in those days. Well, I'll hand over the microphone to David. I'll let these people talk. And then once we're finished, we can perhaps decide. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Robbie. Yeah, we love bankers at the Library of Mistakes. We love anybody as long as you give a donation and as long as you buy T-shirts and as long as you do our course. I always, it's normally Russell up here and I normally prompting him to say these things. And he is always reticent. He says, you know, we sell too much, David. But now I'm gay abandoned up here. I'm going to say, yeah, donate. If you go to the website, you can donate to us. Thank you very much, all of you who did donate when you bought tickets. But it costs a lot of money to keep this place warm. So please do donate. And also, you might have seen on the website that we have wonderful membership. Now you get access membership, so you can come in and read to your heart's content, read any one of our 5,000 volumes, and you can borrow books as well. Anyway, enough selling from me. I'm chairing tonight, and I am the Chief Executive of Didasco, which is a very small charity, but that looks after the Library of Mistakes. So I'm delighted to be here. And a real big thank you to Robbie for putting on these amazing events. Yeah, please come in. Everybody's welcome. You can move down to the back. There's plenty more seats down there. Thank you very much. I'm not going to be like a comedian and embarrass people coming in. But I'm particularly looking forward to our session tonight on wealth, partly because it's such a wide area. I mean, it's such a strong word in some ways. It's, we all want wealth, we all aspire to wealth, we all want people to make wealth for us. We look at our investors to do that. So I'm looking forward to lots of good ideas tonight from our very well accomplished three speakers. The first of which is Andrew Milligan, who was head of global strategy at Aberdeen. With Aberdeen, it's now back to being Aberdeen again, but he was head of global strategy at Aberdeen, and he's now an independent economist, and he'll be speaking first. And then our next speaker is Amanda Young, who was chief sustainability officer at Aberdeen, and now is an independent. Sorry, is that correct? Yes. Oh, you did get that right, did I? Good. Oh, right, excellent, good. I always like to get things right. And is now an independent sustainability professional, she works, among other things, at Jeffy and is on the University of Edinburgh Responsible Investment Advisory Group. And then we're delighted as well to have Kleisa Lidman, who, the most important thing is she's a member of the board of Tedasco, the charity behind the Library of Mistakes, but she also is an investment analyst at Aubrey Asset Management. So please give a big round of applause to our speakers, and then Andrew will go ahead. Over to you, Andrew.
Thank you very much indeed for inviting me to speak to you today. I absolutely agree. When I was first asked by Robbie and David to speak, I thought, wealth? Gosh. So I've spent a couple of days, which in my time is quite a lot, thinking about these issues. I do apologise. I'm going to say my glasses off and read. I don't normally read, as some of you know, but I wanted the words that I'm saying, I've thought about them quite carefully, and I don't want to just launch into slightly airy-fairy, which is, as some of you probably know, what I do most of the time. So I am going to read out, and I will try to make it interesting for you all. Amanda is going to read as well, but she'll do better than I will. Is that my phone? It's someone's phone.
I'm terribly sorry. It is actually the ringer outside.
Ah.
So we just leave the door ajar.
Okay. Adam Smith helps us understand how a society's wealth grows over time and the barriers to mobilising wealth for the benefit of the many rather than the few. He demonstrated the benefits which arise from enlightened self-interest, from the division of labour, competitive markets, progressive taxation, comparative advantage and international trade. Very important in 2026. Thrift and saving allow surplus capital to accumulate, which drives investment and hence progress. All excellent things. We mustn't forget, though, that his very deep analysis reflected a world which was in the very earliest stages of a transformative industrial revolution. So we have to turn to many other economists for useful insights on a whole range of issues which pertain to wealth. The rise of stock market quoted companies, the gap between ownership and managerial control, Galbraith, for example. The role of governments in preventing disruptive economic cycles damaging wealth, the Keynes of this world. The problems of serious externalities, which Amanda's going to talk about a lot more in a few minutes. So Pigou, Knight, Schumacher, let alone the critique of behavioural economists, which really has only come through, of course, in the last couple of decades. So Adam Smith saw the accumulation of wealth through free trade and open markets, quite rightly. This works, though, in a world of equally balanced nations where exchange rates rise and fall with trade, not with massive capital flows as we see today, and where both consumers and producers are very well informed. Now, that wasn't the situation in 1776, and in many regards, not the situation in 2026 either. In today's spheres of influence, trade is controlled by a few major powers. Of course, there's strong competition in some markets, cars, for example, or white goods. The internet means that many more consumers have much more information when choosing a hotel bedroom. That is very good. However, we demonstrably live in a world of global oligopolies. To all intents and purposes, there are only two suppliers of mobile phone software. You're an Apple person or you're a Google person. You haven't got a wide choice here. Only about a dozen companies control, to all intents and purposes, the technology sector and a lot of the pounds that come out of our wallets. So the first of many quotes this evening from Adam Smith quotes, "The sophistry of merchants, inspired by the spirit of monopoly, has confounded the common sense of mankind." So against that background of he was right, but the world's moved on in economic terms, and certainly many aspects of what he talked about no longer exists in the world today, oligopoly, market forces, etc. I still think there are several areas where Smith's insights can assist us with a 21st century discussion about wealth creation and financial investments, which Clive will talk more about in a moment. While a capitalist society can create considerable wealth, the issue is who benefits and who suffers, how and when. Smith is well known for strongly attacking the vested interests of his time, politicians who advocated protectionism, guilds of merchants who would collaborate to depress wages and raise prices. Another quote, "People of the same trade will seldom meet together, but the conversation ends in some contrivance to raise prices. 'Twas ever thus." In today's world of Silicon Valley influencers, we should beware, quotes, "an order of men who generally have an interest to deceive and even to oppress the public," an awful lot of social media. Smith was very well aware of the risks for monopolies and other privileges that producers extract from government action or government inaction. Externalities often derive from poorly defined property rights, an issue Smith was very concerned about, and I think we should today. Amanda will talk much more about this in a moment. Let's turn to financial investments for a moment with another quote from Smith. "Every individual is continually exerting himself to find out the most advantageous employment for whatever capital he can command. In theory, of course, this should result in efficient markets and the creation of wealth. The problem is that asset prices rise and fall not just because of the self-interest of millions of investors making decisions, but also fear and greed, behavioural economics, Ponzi schemes, poor regulation, political surprises, random luck. I think Smith would be aghast at the profound financialisation of society in 2026, which clearly has been happening, of course, for several decades. Profit-making increasingly works through financial channels rather than trade or production. Other aspects, the ascendancy of very narrow shareholder interests in relation to corporate governance, the growing dominance of capital markets over bank-based financial systems. The only statistic, I think, in my talk, in 2025, financial assets in the USA were worth well over $400 trillion. The GDP, the annual output of the US economy, $30 trillion. That's an awful lot of paper wealth on the basis of a much smaller amount of actual hard production. And yes, I'm aware, of course, some of that wealth was global, but you still get the point. To quote one analyst, not Smith, but another quote I liked, "This situation is not indicative of a productive economy paying for itself, but rather one that's dependent on financial engineering and the consumption of capital, borrowing growth and output from the future." The first of many comments I'm sure we'll make about our grandchildren and the fact they are going to have to cope with the massive issuance of public and private debt. Of course, technologies such as artificial intelligence may create considerable wealth, but I've just finished reading Adam Tooze's book on the 2008 financial crash, which I heartily recommend. Everything he says about greed, criminality, selfishness, foolishness would resonate with Adam Smith, someone who was very aware of the tulip bubble in 1634, the South Sea bubble in the 1720s, almost within his lifetime, so to speak. Now, for a libertarian, of course, they would find a suitable quote from Adam Smith about the importance of private property as the foundation of society. So, if I wish to invest my money in Andrew Tate-style AI-driven blogs, or pornographic websites, or arms manufacturers, or Trump meme coins, that's my prerogative because it's my wealth, my private property, some would argue. I think to counter that argument, we need to turn to Adam Smith's words of wisdom on moral matters. And of course, as everyone knows, he wrote the two famous books. One of the last quotes. "All for ourselves and nothing for other people seems in every age of the world to have been the vile maxim of the masters of mankind. because we're social creatures as well as market creatures. We are very empathetic to issues close to home. We all support the food banks, or those issues that are well reported in the media, Ukraine. But there's a lot of issues that are deliberately hidden or very difficult to ascertain. Modern slavery would be a prime example, or the supply chain for cobalt. So there's a lot of moral issues about how we buy, consume, build up wealth. Financial markets are simply a reflection of today's society. Greed, the desire for power and influence, and Mr. Epstein and all that we're learning from him, he used his networking skills amazingly well in that regard. So as Adam Smith argued, a truly virtuous person would embody the qualities of prudence, justice, benefice and self-command. In preparation for this evening, Robbie reminded me that list should include the value of patience. Smith saw waiting for rewards as very important for the well-being of society. So we can become that sort of person, which matters whether we are consumers, producers or investors, but that's a moral revolution within all of us, which then creates a more moral society. To sum up, how do we begin to tackle some of the worst excesses of modern day capitalism, especially the problems with financial markets? Absolutely, we need to read and learn from Adam Smith. We need unfettered competition, moral sentiments, and a regulatory framework which will at least limit greed or externalities which otherwise lead to socially harmful outcomes. I think Adam Smith's writing about some of the core principles help us enormously in that regard. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Amanda, would you please give your presentation now? Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. Like Andrew, I thought I should put down my notes on a piece of paper rather than ad-lib. So forgive me again for reading those. So, as the Library of Mistakes suggests, we are here to reconsider the errors of our understanding. In this case, the view that Adam Smith was a simple champion of unbounded self-interest. In reality, Smith's vision was a lot more complex. In The Wealth of Nations, he explicitly said government must uphold justice and fund necessary public works, not abandon all responsibility to the market. He argued that a ruler's duty included defending the realm, protecting society from injustice or oppression, as well as maintaining society's infrastructure. Smith also argued that humans have innate moral feelings supporting the good of society. Even his famous invisible hand metaphor, the idea that individuals pursuing their own self-interest in a free market unintentionally promote the welfare of society, was about unintended social benefits, not a license for greed. He certainly was no apologist for unchecked selfishness. But we must also be honest about what Smith did not include. He wrote at a time when both nature's bounty and household labour were assumed unlimited and free. In The Wealth of Nations, he even observes that in agriculture, nature labours along with man, and though her labours cost no expense, its produce has its value. Yet the economic models of his era effectively ignored those free inputs. Later economists reduced production to labour alone, brushing aside the role of soil, sunlight, pollinators, and water. Nature provides unaccountable, valuable inputs in all economic activity, and its overuse now imposes hidden costs that markets never priced in, and still don't in many cases. In Smith's world, wilderness and clean air were assumed bottomless, so they were never included in his calculations. Smith's admission partly reflects his context. In his era, many things, like nature's inputs, were taken as inexhaustible, but cultural context also matters. Societies like Britain, and in particular up here in Scotland, have long traditions of common welfare and social solidarity. Scots often speak of egalitarianism as inherent in the national culture. After World War II, Britain enacted Beveridge's plan to vanquish the 5 giant evils of want, disease, ignorance, squalor, and idleness. Attlee's Labour government proceeded to implement these in founding a universal health service, which we all love, and broad welfare programs. Now, in these traditions, Smith's emphasis on justice and sympathy rings true. The idea that society has a duty to protect its weakest members is a given. Likewise, Smith's formal economics treated the household as a black box. The vast unpaid work done in homes, cooking, caring for children and elders, maintaining families, simply doesn't appear in GDP or classic value theory. Modern GDP measures only monetary transactions and excludes all essential unpaid household work and family care. Work fallen disproportionately on female shoulders historically. Feminist economists have long pointed out that our economic models literally assume this work will be done for free, normally by women. The work that Smith's world depended on have consistently left out or undervalued. We might even call that unpaid care our society's grossly undervalued domestic product. By leaving these cornerstones invisible, Smith and later economists make the economy appear self-sustaining, when in fact it was propped up by gratuitous contributions. Today, we can see why this matters. Politicians and corporations love to invoke Smith's invisible hand as if it blessed any pursuit of profit. But this is a distortion. Smith's example of the invisible hand always involved community benefit, to promote an end that helps society. In Moral Sentiments, he imagined the rich inadvertently providing necessities for the poor. He never meant self-interest to absolve individuals from the laws of justice. In fact, he explicitly said, each person is left perfectly free to pursue his own interests so long as he does not violate the laws of justice. In other words, Smith saw personal ambition working only when bounded by moral and legal constraints. Critics of modern capitalism note that we have often forgotten that caveat. To many, the invisible hand is just shorthand for greed is good. But as critics point out, unchecked markets can lead to inequality, concentrated corporate power, and environmental disaster. Outcomes Smith never intended. In practice, because economists never charge for nature's contributions, companies have treated forests and fisheries as free dumping grounds. And because we didn't count household labour, businesses assumed workers have wives, mothers, or children ready to provide care for nothing. This omission has real costs. Environmental scientists warn that during a single human lifetime, we have changed the planet so much that the benign, stable conditions sustaining civilization have ended. A shocking truth. And social observers point out that by ignoring domestic labour, we reinforce gender inequality. As one activist puts it, our economy literally runs on women's unpaid work, a vast subsidy that helps firms look profitable while others pick up the tab. So the mistake in Smith is not that he was wrong about self-interest, but that later generations misremembered him as a one-dimensional free market prophet and dropped his context. The real Adam Smith acknowledged many limits, though he didn't build them into formulas. He worried about workers' mental mutilation from endless repetitive labours and even suggested public education as a remedy. He saw wealth not merely as gold, but as the nation's ability to enjoy the necessities, conveniences, and amusements of life. He hinted that the rich had a moral duty to donate part of their surplus for the common good, an act very few truly rich people do. We need to remember that Smith called for markets under proper regulation, and given his praise for dismantling monopolies, he likely would support laws that guard against environmental ruin. So reclaiming Smith's full legacy means doing what he never got a chance to do explicitly: reinterrogate morality, ecology, and social care into economics. It means accounting for the free gifts of nature, perhaps by pricing carbon and protecting natural capital, and valuing the care work that sustains us. It means preserving Smith's system of natural liberty under the fixed pillars of justice and public good. Only then will we heed Smith's true message that economics should serve society as a whole. He wrote that people instinctively delight in the orderly and flourishing state of society and recoil from its breakdown. In practice, this requires going beyond the simplistic invisible hand myth and remembering Smith's full vision of a well-governed society. That's the real lesson the Library of Mistakes asks us to learn. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Very stimulating presentation there. I'm now going to ask Liza to give hers.
Great.
Liza.
Well, Andrew and Amanda, you've certainly given me a great segue where I'm going to be taking the themes mentioned earlier in the context of capital allocation and financial markets. So with that, let me start with a distinction that I think matters enormously, and these words have been repeated throughout the evening and through Adam Smith's work. And I think it gets lost almost every time he's brought up in a financial context. And that is that self-interest and greed are two different things. In fact, to him, he almost thinks they're the opposite. So bear with me while I try to break down that argument for you. But first off, Smith was deeply suspicious of three groups. One, merchants who colluded fixed prices against public interest. Two, directors and managers who treat other people's capital as their own and deploy it in that mindset. And finally, financial intermediaries who have become so disconnected with the productive use of capital that they stop caring where it goes. And I have a point that I will refer to later on. Now, so what did Smith actually mean when he was talking about self-interest, if it isn't greed? Now, I will say a quote, and so I will read this out loud. It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from the regard of their own interest. And that's essentially a claim of how markets coordinate decentralized information. The butcher wants to sell the meat, you want to eat the meat, and there's no benevolence required. There is a mutual understanding of a transaction. But Smith assumes that the butcher is operating in three conditions to make self-interest societally productive. One, justice. You're going to assume the butcher isn't going to want to poison you. Two, competition. You're going to assume that the butcher is not going to overcharge you because there is a butcher just down the street. And finally, reputation. He ideally is going to be nice to you because he wants you to come back and buy more from him. Remove any of these three things and then self-interest stops producing good outcomes. And this is why The Wealth of Nations doesn't stop at book 1, but actually book 2 to 5 talks about the institutional conditions in which self-interest works for society rather than against it. And those themes are regulation, competition, public goods. Public goods. So with that, we then take the definition of greed. And this is much more covered in his other work, which is the theory of moral sentiments. And here he talks about self-interest turns to greed when it escapes essentially moral boundaries. And he makes the observation of the psychological effect that actually greed isn't necessarily wanting to collect wealth itself, but it's to be seen as wealthy and how it commands admiration and validation from others. And he highlights that this is actually one of the biggest corruption forces for a commercial society. Now, Andrew mentioned this earlier in terms of what a virtuous person is, so I won't repeat that. And so what I wanted to highlight here, as I set the scene, is Adam Smith being used to defend greed is actually a mistake, and Amanda referred to this earlier. And so with that in mind, I want to take two very specific features of today's markets that I think Smith would challenge. Not necessarily because they involve self-interest, but what they can enable, the conditions that make self-interest go wrong. Now, Smith's account of how markets actually allocate capital depends on a certain mechanism called the active investor. I am an investment analyst, in case that wasn't clear. Now, his definition of the active investor is every individual is continually exerting himself to find out the most advantageous employment for whatever capital he can command. And basically that means, in his account, the markets works because of a specific process, the investment process. An investor researches a company, looks at the accounts, the business model, the market dynamics, and the assessment of management, and then buys and sells based on this judgment. And while doing so, they do two things. One, they theoretically make money for themselves. And two, it incorporates information into the share price so that the price becomes more accurate, essentially price discovery. The more accurate the price, this then signals to everyone else where capital is needed. More productive enterprises or companies attract investment and grow. Less productive become starved of capital and shrink. And this is Smith's invisible hand theory. And this is essentially the aggregate of millions of informed, self-interested decisions nudging prices towards accuracy. Here is where I then talk about passive investing, specifically index funds. And obviously there is a self-interest bias to this, so bear with me as I give you my take. An index fund buys every company in the index, regardless of quality, valuation, or management. It technically expresses no view. It contributes very little to the informational process that sets the price, but it benefits from the prices that active investors have set. So essentially, it free rides on their research, their judgment, and their work. And this is the classic free rider problem. The active investor produces two things: private return for themselves, in theory, and a public good in the form of accurate prices. The index fund takes the private return without doing the work that produces the public good. But as long as the minority of the investors are passive, the active majority can still do price discovery adequately. But passive investing now accounts for 50 to 60%, if not more, of US equity market assets. At that scale, the question now is whether the remaining active investors are sufficient enough to keep the prices accurate, to keep Smith's mechanism actually working. And arguably, the answer today is significantly less than it was before. His invisible hand only works if people are actually extending it. And that means that if the majority of capital is allocated with no view expressed, no judgment exercised, the mechanism degrades itself. Index funds are not wrong in themselves, but actually you could argue it's a very Smithian theory in that it democratizes the access to capital markets. But if the market is composed of primarily index funds, it is no longer doing what Smith said the markets were for. And then there's a second problem. 3 firms, BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, apologies if you all work there, but also don't out me, dominate the index fund markets globally. Collectively, these 3 are the largest shareholders in 88% of the S&P 500 companies. And that doesn't mean they're the majority shareholder, but they own about 20 to 25% collectively. In a world where there is dispersed ownership, 20 to 25% may not be the majority, but it is functionally dominant. And when there is no other single shareholder that comes close, and because index funds vote in blocks and use the same proxy advisors, ISS or Glass Lewis, again, if you work there, don't come for me. The effective concentration of voting power is even greater than the absolute shareholding figures that you see. Smith, as we know, was opposed to concentrated economic power, whether that was in merchant guilds, monopoly trading companies, political favoritism, sheltering companies against certain competitive forces. So 3 asset managers could become the dominant voice in the boardroom of the major corporations in the world while having no particular conviction about any of them. And to be honest, I think this would be a very scary thought for him. Technology has enabled us to build the most sophisticated capital allocation machinery in history, and yet systematically has removed people doing the allocating. Not saying that technology is bad, but I think there are concerns with that I think Adam Smith would highlight. The second thing that I think Smith would notice in today's markets is essentially the death of patient capital. And what does that mean? He drew an explicit distinction between fixed capital and circulating capital. Circulating capital moves fast. It essentially enables trade, keeps economies liquid. Fixed capital is invested in long-term productive capacity, such as machinery, infrastructure, land, and skilled labor. He also argued that explicitly saving is the engine of capital accumulation and therefore national prosperity. What basically that means is deferred consumption, patiently applied in a long-term view for productive ends, is how societies grow richer over time. But now we take a look at what has happened to that time horizon in the modern markets. In the 1960s, the average holding period for US stocks was around 8 years. Today, it's around 5 to 10 months. High-frequency traders hold positions for milliseconds. The entire architecture of modern markets today has been rebuilt around speed. And the consequences of this is well beyond the trading floor. You can see it when capital is short-term, it impacts the people running them. That means CEOs themselves and strategies become short-term. You think about quarterly earnings that pressures and forces CEOs to cut research and development, cut training. Suddenly they are challenged every quarter by investors of why aren't they exceeding or surprising in their quarterly earnings. And so they are almost disincentivized to focus on long-term investments to actually build productive capacity. And so what this happens is Smith's fixed capital is starting to turn into circularity capital. He would probably recognize this as a misalignment, so the principal-agent problem that he mentions in book 5, and yes, I have read them, and I listened to the audiobook, so I feel like I can say this. The manager's incentive hits the quarter numbers, protects the share price, focuses on his short-term bonuses, and this diverges from the actual owner's interest in long-term productive value. In book 2, he makes the case for banking regulation, which Amanda touched on, and that's rarely cited for those who want to claim him as a prophet for deregulation. He actually argues that some restrictions on bankers who deploy capital are justified because the financial intermediaries' risks are not necessarily borne by themselves alone, and that's a lesson we've all come across. So, how I'd like to maybe close this is with a couple of thoughts and maybe a question for yourselves. We've built financial markets with extraordinary sophistication. The instruments are more complex, the trading speed is greater, information dispersion is greater, and the global reach is probably wider than anything Smith could have ever imagined. And yet, the two metrics that Smith probably cared about, capital being directed by patient human judgment toward productive long-term uses, and is the wealth being generated broadly shared, you could argue that the markets haven't actually properly achieved this. Now, he wasn't anti-market, and he wasn't anti-capital. He was just specifically and explicitly anti-monopoly, anti-collusion, and anti the pretense that moving money around is the same as creating wealth. And if you want a live illustration of how a trajectory going wrong, look at what is happening to the prediction markets right now. The prediction markets are essentially, what is the likelihood that U.S. invades Iran by the end of February? They were conceived at the purest possible expression of Smith's active investor. Everyone was forced to have a view, everyone had skin in the game, and the prices reflected genuine distributed judgment. But what has actually happened to this now? They have become a case study in everything that Smith warns of. Geopolitical prediction is widely suspected to be riddled with insider trading. So participants with privileged access to non-public material, essentially taking money from those without it. The information symmetry that he identified as a precondition for market failure operates in the clearest form in this case. And in the broader culture of these platforms reflects a drift from self-interest to greed, from considered judgment of genuine probabilities to speculation and leverage gambling, and whether a ceasefire will hold by Friday. And so these things that Smith thought actually created wealth, patience, judgment, genuine productive investment in fixed capital, and the moral framework that keeps self-interest from turning into greed, I think are still available. They're just not rewarded by the current structure that we see in financial institutions. And so maybe, whether you're a personal investor or a professional investor, one of the interesting challenges today is it to beat the market, or is it to be that kind of patient, judicious allocator of capital that Smith thought was the entire point of having the capital markets in the first place? And maybe question why this currently feels mutually exclusive.
Thank you very much. So three very wide-ranging presentations there. And I should have fessed up at the beginning. There was a young lady came into the library who was studying economics about 4 months ago, and we said we were having an event on Adam Smith, and she said, "Who?" And I kind of thought, wow, because even I know who Adam Smith is, but I don't know enough about Adam Smith. So I'm really, and this is, I don't think these sessions are designed to be finding more about Adam Smith, but the relevance of Adam Smith today. So, it's called The Wealth of Nations, and I'm intrigued by that terminology. Today, we seem to have a sense of wealth being much wider than money. Do you think back then, Andrew? I'll go to you first. Do you think back then that maybe he didn't, or was that revolutionary at the time to think of wealth just in money terms?
I will rely on the Robbies of this world, but my answer would be he was battling what the economists call the mercantilist view, that you just accumulate an awful lot of gold and that's your wealth. Several people are nodding, thank you. And so he was very much moving towards the wealth of the nation is its entire productive capacity, its ability through the market mechanism, through commerce, through trade, through production, to create a much more substantial view of what wealth should be than simply, I've got 84 gold bars because that's what France gave me in exchange for the last grain, etc. So yes, I think now, I think what would we say wealth is now? I mean, it is interesting because we might say wealth is our stocks and shares, but as we know, they can disappear remarkably quickly in front of us. We might say wealth is our human capital, but as I come towards the end of my life, I'm not quite sure how much longer I'm going to have to enjoy that compared to some of the youngsters in the audience. Wealth, you might start to say, is the resilience of an individual, a household, a society, an economy. What's the resilience of that society? The wealth in the sense of all of the aspects that can safeguard the individual or the society from the problems and pressures that it faces. So I'm not sure that nowadays, if he voted again, he would spend as much time thinking about financial wealth. I think he'd probably be a man who thinks about wealth in a much broader array, as I've haltingly tried to say in the last minute or so.
Right, can I just say, I don't think Andrew's getting close to the end of his life, just to be like, I hope he's going to be with us a bit longer.
Yes, but how much more human capital I've got.
Yeah, right, okay, good. Amanda, that ignoring or not seeing the things that you referred to of all these things that that were thought to be in abundance, is that part of the same thing, that understanding of wealth in just a very singular kind of way? And is it something that just we'll always have, that some people will always miss the wood for the trees, etc.?
So I feel that as you get older, your outlook on life changes. And certainly when you're younger, wealth is seen very much as how many pounds or dollars you have in your pocket. And as you get older, the things that make you feel wealthy are not the material things. They're the things that bring you joy. Seeing a whale in the ocean, or having an experience with your family under a tree. Those memories, for me, are the wealth that we all end up having. And I think I have not read all of Adam Smith's books. I will put my hand up to that. So this has been really helpful for me to really kind of get my head around, and I'm not an economist by background, his thinking, his theories. And I think in his day, life was much simpler. It didn't have the complexities that we deal with today. And because of that simplicity, things like family, cohesion, environment, and things you took for granted were part of wealth, but for him it was much more a monetary thing. So I think that over the time, as we have less of things, the world, peace, environmental issues, access to clean water, as these things become less free, they become more wealthy.
Okay.
Can
Sorry,
I
Andrew, yeah.
Can I just add a little? It's a thought that Amanda created. When I did my economics, basics, O-level, etc., we were talking about the factors of production, land, labour, capital, and then technology, etc. And I think perhaps what the three of us are saying is, although Adam Smith would not necessarily have talked in the terms of land, labour, capital, technology, he wouldn't have talked about factors of production. He would have understood exactly. Perhaps what's happened since his time is we've emphasised capital and technology far more than land and labour. You don't need to be a trade unionist to say that something peculiar is going on when the average standard of living for the majority of people in the developed world has not improved for 20 to 30 years. Sounds like the capital-labour imbalance has changed. And everything that Amanda was talking about in terms of land, using that in the most generic phrase, the date that always comes to me, and it's a horrifying one, it's Earth Day, which is the day that the Earth Overshoot Day. You tell them what Earth Overshoot Day is.
It's the day in the year that we have used all the natural capital that we can replenish. And it's now in July.
It's now in July each year. So after that, we are using up too much forest, too much land, too much sea, etc. So land and labour have very clearly been biased away in terms of the factors of production. And Smith, in one sense, was talking about the factors of production and how those would be brought together for the benefit of society. And the way we've ended up, we're emphasising two far more than the other two. But that thought did come from what Amanda said, so I'm allowed to say it.
All right. Can I just ask, and I'm going to maybe ask Cliza about this, as the you represent here the millennial generation, let's say, and I'm reliably told, I'm reliably told that millennials are much more interested in a broader sense of wealth, and yet why is it that we all seem to agree that these things are more important, and yet it doesn't seem to be reflected? I mean, like even the way you talked about financial markets, it doesn't seem to be. We seem to all agree that these things are important, and yet we're really struggling to see them manifest in our systems for generating wealth.
What is the specific question?
Oh, well, the specific question is the specific.
Or is this a prompt?
Because
it could take a while.
The oligopolists are in charge.
Well, no, I suppose I'm just inquiring as to really to develop what you talked about there. Why are we in this situation where our investment industry isn't doing what it should be doing?
Okay, on behalf of the millennials and the investment industry, here are my points. I think there are two things here. I think that the participants in the market has completely changed over the last few years, where it used to be dominantly institutional investors, and now the accessibility of the financial markets arguably, I think, accelerated over COVID when nobody could bet on anything because there were no events. They all decided that they could be investors, and now we see some of that. And again, like what Smith said, I think the access of the capital markets is important and good for society, but I also think it has contributed to some of the volatility that we see today, because there is just so much information, and the ability to cut through noise to have a longer term view is getting more difficult. And I think what we're seeing now is that that behavior is not just impacting retail investors who are actively in the financial markets, but it's also shifting the mindset of institutional investors.
Okay. And you used the word, I think you talked about democratization, or that's something that Adam Smith would have, let's say what he's for. I mean, we can, I'm sure, all go through what Adam Smith would have, but you know, if he were to have supported something like that, is the democratization then of the markets, is that the thing that's killing it then in some ways? Because you're opening it up to, you said, I mean, it used to be old professional investors who maybe had a more long-term and had the ability to have a long-term view. Is that one of the problems? I hope this isn't an awkward question from someone, and I can extend it to the panel to those people who aren't working directly for investment managers anymore.
I have a view that it's because the markets are now at the mercy. You know, we talk about democratization, but is it truly democratic if you're investing in a passive fund? Right. Markets worked because more and more people could access investments and make their own investments. Mm-hmm. And so whilst more people can invest, they're not really investing, they're just giving their money to passive funds to invest. So I actually think it's because we are allowing, and you raised the point very, very well, 3 large US asset managers to invest our money passively through the pension funds who choose to appoint them. And so if we come back to Smith, the one thing that he talked about is regulated markets. But who is regulating the passive investors to actually determine that we need to have much more of a free market when it comes to active ownership?
Okay, so I'm going to throw that to Andrew now, who isn't working, I don't think, for any investment manager anymore, so you can be as honest as you want on this. I mean, what do we do about these 3 big asset companies that basically sit there on vast sums, doing very little from the sound of things as regards price discovery? You
vote for President Trump to completely change American society.
Ah, okay.
In one sense, as I hope will become clear. You're absolutely right. Of course, we've got democratisation. Any one of us can open an ISA, put our £20,000 in and invest with far more information than we could several years ago. But let's not pretend amongst ourselves that this group of people, you may be in the top 1% of wealth in the world. Congratulations for reaching that, luck or judgment. But in relation to the sovereign wealth funds, in relation to the oligopolists, in relation to the multi-billionaires, they are the ones that are dominating the market nowadays. And the amount of inside information that is floating around, which the likes of us will never benefit from. Let's not forget, why do you need several £billion to be a US senator to bribe and persuade your way? US senators have no insider dealing rules. So the amount of inside dealing that goes on in US government is completely stunning. So, yes, there is a democratization of the small man and woman investor, but in the last 10, 20 years, I'm afraid we've reached a stage where very large blocks of capital move around the world, which is completely irrelevant to the old pension ISA world, which we might have grown up in. And that I'm afraid, is just the situation we've got to face.
Can I ask, I remember when I studied philosophy in university a long, long time ago, and I remember one of my lecturers coming in and saying, if you think that we're any better than we were 200, 300 years ago, 1,000 years ago.
Absolutely.
We're not. In terms of Adam Smith then, have we made any progress in any of the areas that Adam Smith identified, particularly in terms of, you said that, I think you 3 of you all referred to that collusion element, that stiffing others through getting together. have we made any progress, or has it got worse?
Indeed, because we're exactly the same morally as we were in his time, or 3,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, which is why we still read Greek and Roman plays and they resonate with us, or Shakespearean plays. We're exactly the same moral creatures. So some of us are very susceptible to power and influence, and they became a friend of Epstein. That's built into us. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that we've learned a lot more of the pitfalls, and perhaps through the whole world of SRI, we're a little more aware of the problems. But I think as moral creatures, we're exactly as we were in his time.
Okay. Amanda, I mean, your specialisation was trying to...
Indeed, forgive me, indeed I might even argue that we're slightly worse. We're getting into dangerous ground here, but, the world of moral relativism is a 21st century phenomena. It wouldn't have been of his day.
Okay. I mean, given your area of speciality then, I mean, is that not a very depressing framework that Andrew's just presented for you?
So I take a slightly different view in that, we're still the same morally, but we have so much more information at our fingertips that it makes us very different. And we have the ability to make decisions based on that information. And we are people, and we base our decisions on emotion. And so in that way, I think information and the ability to make decisions with so much more access to is a positive. What we've done to our planet is awful, and it's done because that information wasn't available at the time, that companies thought that they could go in and, literally rape the landscape in order to access natural resources. We now know that companies do that because we have that information. So I think from a positive, we have more information. We have freedom to do something with that information, but I also fear that greed has escalated out of control, which goes against that moral philosophy that Adam Smith was writing underneath, which makes us worse. So sorry, I'm not actually answering your question.
Well, I mean, I'm interested you say there's more information around now, because, I mean, there might well be, but I see a lot of people voting for a gentleman in the United States who seems to deny what most scientists say is happening to the planet. So it brings us back to that point that we've all referred to about that short-termism, that selfishness, that, I'm not thinking of the big picture here, I'm just going to think of myself. How can we... It all seems a bit helpless, doesn't it?
I want to just...
Go for it.
Yeah?
I don't know, maybe like a little seed of hope here.
There you go.
Hope is always good.
Thanks to the millennials for the hope. There you go.
It is just a Tuesday, and but I think to your point around information, I mean, what we're going to go through over the next 20 years is the biggest generational wealth transfer to the younger generations. And I think with the access of more information and the awareness, I understand that, there has been a sentimental shift away from sustainability and ESG, and maybe I'm, the people that I'm exposed to, there's a bias there, but I'd like to think that my generation, and certainly Gen Z, who are very opinionated in the best way, they are asking more questions and they are challenging the existing framework. So I'd like to think that actually there is a level of hope and there can be a transition period. I mean, the fact that the Gen Zs alone have actually decimated the alcohol industry is actually really impressive, So there, not that should be the seed of hope, but I think the analogy can transfer to maybe if they are willing to learn a little bit more, there's more access to information, they might actually also be willing to be more opinionated by how they allocate capital, and then therefore maybe have more of an impact of where it goes.
And I think we also need to remember this is about wealth. And none of us are saying wealth is bad. It's about how that wealth is generated. Is that from a good or bad perspective? But let's not forget the ability of money to do good. And that's, to your point about new generation. When you look at some of the businesses that are being developed today, They are trying to solve problems. They're trying to solve circular economy business model, create circular economy business models, reduce energy consumption, make us more resilient when it comes to, homegrown energy, make it green, you think about the rewilding efforts that are going on. There is hope there that when people do have money and they deploy that money and that wealth in a positive way, it can create greater wealth than we have in our pockets, from the dollars and the cents. So I just think we face different challenges than Adam Smith faced. Is it good or better or worse? I mean, look at our healthcare system. Yeah. We survive. I would not have survived the birth of my child in Adam Smith's day because I didn't have the modern technology to do that. So it's all relative.
Excellent. I think I'm going to open up. Well, it's nice to have a bit of positivity here. I've been pushing us down a very negative path here. I think there must be lots of questions because we go anywhere with this. I love this conversation. We go anywhere with it. Who wants to? There's hello, Anne. So I'm going to have to be a bit like one of those TV shows from the 1970s where I run around with a microphone. What? Oh, right. Oh, will you go? Excellent. Even better. I don't have to jump down. There you go. If you can hand it over to.
Thank you very much indeed. And I can tell this is on. My name's Anne Ferguson. Thank you, Andrew, Amanda. And is it Clyde, your name?
Liza.
Thank you very much. These were really interesting conversations. And I don't think this is really a discussion about wealth as such. I think this is a discussion about morals. And it's really had me thinking that in Adam Smith's time, life must have been very hard. Absolutely, millennials are going to solve the world's problems. And at the moment, and it won't last forever, we are blindsided by an absolutely deranged president in America who takes our breath away because he's just immoral in front of us. He's not fighting Iran because he gives a rat's tail about Iran. He's doing this all for his own self-aggrandizement and his own wealth. So the risk we have is, and it's going on in Ukraine even as well as in Russia, is the world is being plundered by a few. That's what you have to sort out. We have a lot of morality, but very, very intense immorality that we have to be up against. So, people can live good lives, and lots of people want to live good lives. People aren't bad. Just a few are bad, and they're an absolute bugger in our society, in our world at the moment, that we were globally connected. So good on you, sort it out.
I'll do my best.
But well, only I think I would agree with you, but I think these needs the democratic process to work a lot better than it has in recent years in many countries, or, I hate to say it, it requires revolution. What we mean by the word revolution is another matter entirely, but it might be a small revolution rather than a big revolution. Yeah, but I think to extricate ourselves from this trap, we're going to need a very different sort of society within 20, 50 years, whatever it is. And in that sense, a revolution akin to the Industrial Revolution, the Enlightenment Revolution, or whatever other revolution in social customs and thinking that you would require as relevant.
I think there's...
Anybody want to support President Trump?
Yes.
I think
he wants to...
I think there's also an element of how susceptible, like, why are the markets reacting to every word he says? So I remember, oh gosh, okay, I'm about to expose myself here, but here we go. Last year, when he was, all the executive directives he signed, the talks about the tariffs, the way that the market was reacting, for me, I mean, before the taco, Trump acts cowards out, before that term came about, I just found him quite impulsive. And in a way, looking at kind of what he was trying to, the news flow that he was generating, I just had it in my mind where I'm like, okay, if he says one thing, I'm just going to wait 3 weeks before I actually consider what he said, because it's just, the way that the news flow, especially today, and I don't know how people in, not in my industry deal with the news flow, because there's just so much information constantly being put out. And, part of my job is to be up to, current affairs and try to understand what's going on in the markets. And even I'm overwhelmed. And so much of the job is try to cut through noise to have some level of judgment or take on something.
Yeah.
And it's extremely difficult. And I think one of the things that does need to change is that responsibility of information and misinformation. And there are, where Adam Smith didn't have social media or TikTok or Instagram or whatever to disperse this information, I think there needs to be some sort of regulation around that. But I don't know the answer to that question. It's just my personal experience of trying to absorb the news and make sense of it.
Just very quick clarification before we go to the question down here. Is that in some ways like Trump and anybody else like gaming that thing that actually that Adam Smith talked about, that patience, that actually this is one way to actually fix the system is to overload information onto you and just drive it with ideas, commentary, endless uncertainty.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of his tactic to flood the public sphere with dissemination, false news, fake news, etc. It's part of his tactics.
But would Adam Smith have had was that in some ways what he was kind of cautioning against when he talked about that kind of slowing down of thought and kind of being more patient, etc.?
Well, it obviously would have happened even in his day, in the sense that there had been an awful lot of coffee shops where false information was deliberately. Let's not pretend that false information only existed in the last 20 years. Yeah. He would have faced his own version of that.
Excellent. There's a question over here, and then there's a ton more back.
I'll be quick. Thank you so much for the wonderful contributions so far. This is a question about retail investing. It feels like we're trying to define it in two senses, or at least what I've picked up on, where we've talked about it as a sense of gambling, where obviously you've got meme stocks and so on, and then you've got the democratization of it, where we're talking about index funds. Those to me seem like two ends of, they can't be both at the same thing. If someone's putting their money in the stock market, they're going to be doing one of those things. Now, there's an awful lot of information available now, as never before, but investing in stocks is really hard. Mm-hmm. It takes time, it takes a lot of, intellectual rigor. I've even heard some people make a career out of it. So there are various barriers presented to someone when they want to beat inflation and put their money somewhere that they might actually make a return on it in real terms. So one of those options is they do a purely momentum thing and get behind what anyone else is voting for. The other side of it is, again, from the democracy angle, again, they get behind it and they will basically say, that all of the active investors in the market, I trust what you're doing, and I will effectively leverage what you've already put your money in. And index funds don't, at the minute, make up so much of the market that there are no people making decisions on those stocks anymore. It's massively leveraged, sure, but surely there's still at the kernel of it a sense of people making decisions on what stocks to invest in and how much those companies are worth. It's simply a leveraged thing. The question is, what else should retail investors be doing? What's the alternative?
Can I pass this to one of them?
So putting words into Clive's mouth, the trend towards passive over the last 10, 20 years means that your argument will increasingly start to fall apart because the active. I've always said investing is like gardening. It's actually very simple to do. It depends how much time you want to do and what sort of garden do you want at the end of the day. I don't think there's a great difficulty at all in an individual investor choosing a passive fund. I've always argued that choosing a passive fund is an active decision because you've got to choose which markets, which sectors are you going to invest in. The danger, exactly as Kleiser says, though, is cumulatively it can build up into a situation where there are just too few active investors. There's already an argument amongst some academics that have reached that tipping point. And if not today, it will happen within my lifetime.
And to add to that point, I want to be clear. Also, this is not financial advice in my own personal opinion, but there is a place for passive and index funds, and it makes sense as a retail investor if you don't have the capacity to do all the stock research and the investment process to diversify your risk in that way. I think my take on that was more, it's when there are huge institutional allocation of capital into the index funds that suddenly means that that mechanism of price discovery is now challenged. So as a retail investor, I think what your approach is, well, again, not financial advice, seems fine. The dangers of passive investing, and specifically the index funds, is much more on an institutional level.
But put it another way, if you buy a global stock market index, about 65% of your money is going into the United States. You've got to decide, therefore, whether you think that figure is too high or too low. And that is a decision only you can take, or you can come to me and I'll give you a nice dinner and give you some advice, etc. But at the end of the day, when we say buying passive, you're saying, I want to buy 65% of American stocks. Is that the right figure? Too high, too low? Good question, sir. Give me some money and I'll give you the answer.
I've got it, it's working, and it does seem to be. The red herring last night was the equality agenda, and I think the red herring tonight is sustainability. For the last 60 years, I've been told that we've only got 12 years to save the planet. In the 1960s, I was told that songbirds would be extinct within a few decades because of intensive agriculture. I was also told that by 1980, there'd be 1 billion people starving because the world's resources were used up. In the 1990s, I was told that Arctic ice would be gone by 2015, and oil and gas reserves would pretty well be used up by 2025. None of these have come true. We've followed a net zero strategy that expects us to be able to get all our energy from wind and solar, which are hopelessly inefficient, and it's why we've got soaring energy prices. You can't. We know now that you can't control the weather with a carbon dioxide dimmer switch. The whole thing is just preposterous.
Amanda, I think Amanda, it might be slightly your area, but Andrew after Amanda. Okay.
No, yes, I've got.
Yes, we have been given all of those facts. You're absolutely right. But when we get given those facts, and this comes back to my slightly optimistic point, is people then start trying to figure out how they can actually fight against some of the things that are actually happening. The one thing is absolutely true. We have destroyed 70% of our biodiversity in the last 25 years, 30 years. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Now, you might say, oh, it's fine, it's not a problem. But actually, if you have no bees to pollinate your crops, that is a problem. If you don't have the right biodiversity that helps your ecosystems produce really great agriculture, that is a problem. The great thing is we are human and we are problem solvers. And this comes back to my point, is that one of the things that we have been able to do is create energy that is not reliant on other people's countries. We can, in this country, create our own energy, whether it's through inefficiency or not. There are lots of new technologies that are being developed. You may disagree with them, but they are. And I have got friends in Africa who are entirely self-sufficient because the grid system doesn't work. And they are self-sufficient through renewable energy. So you might say it's inefficient, but if actually you're living in a place where there are constant power cuts, but you can continue to live and cook and heat your food and use your own water resources because you put those solutions in place, all the better for you. So yes, there are lots of facts that you have raised, but what I would say is that we cannot keep using the natural resources the way we do. because there will be no natural resources. I can't tell you a date on when that's going to happen. But think about all those amazing companies that you can go and invest in that have created circular economy business models, and they are making money out of it because we only have finite precious metals that are going into our phones. So rather than destroy them, let's reuse them, let's recirculate them. And actually, circular economy business models are very profitable. Do you know what the largest clothing retailer on the markets at the moment is? Vinted.
Oh, yes.
Vinted is the largest growth clothing retailer in the market because people don't want to go and buy new, they want to buy circular economy. So yes, those facts will keep coming back. And yes, there will be people that argue against the people who are trying to create new ways of operating, save our planet, create the beauty and nature that we have. Yes, there will be. But I can tell you something, that we are clever human beings and we will find solutions to those problems. So yes, we might have a fact today, but that fact can change because we can make that fact change. And that's where I have hope when I see re-engineering, rewilding. I was recently down in Sussex. I don't know if anybody's heard of Knepp. It's a 3,000 acre farm down in Sussex that was totally inefficient because it was being farmed on Wealden clay. And they have rewilded 3,000 acres. They are underneath the flight path. And for the first time this year, in 25 years since rewilding, they have got lichen growing on their trees. Now, those who don't understand the importance of that, lichen only happens when the air quality is great. We in Edinburgh have lichen in our botanics because we're very fortunate. However, underneath a flight path into one of the busiest airports in the world, ecosystems are improving and biodiversity is coming back. So we can help solve some of the problems. And that's not to say that that some of the facts you have stated were wrong. They were probably accurate or wrong. I don't know. But every day we make decisions that change things.
You were absolutely right in everything you said. But we've learnt from that.
Yep,
and the
that's
prime
my
example
point.
would be CFCs.
Yeah.
40 years ago, whatever the date was, somebody said, unless we stop putting CFCs into refrigerators, there's going to be an enormous ozone hole, and the amount of skin cancer that will be affecting anyone with a bald head will just be horrendous. CFCs were taken out. The ozone hole, I think, is pretty much cleared. So you're absolutely right, sir, with an awful lot of what you said, but it comes back to the point we're making about, because we've learned the information and we've responded, and there are no longer CFCs, that ozone hole is no longer a problem. There may be other problems, but the CFC problem and the ozone hole problem is not there.
No, that actually was the fact that I was going to use. And
oh,
also,
I'm so sorry.
No. But I think on the point about renewables, actually, the generation isn't the problem. It's actually the grid infrastructure and the battery technology in order to store all of that. But that being said, yeah, I think, the facts that you've said are probably correct, but they are a point in history, and they do prompt innovation. Yeah.
There's someone with a microphone. I do use SPF.
First of all, thank you so much. This has been a fantastic and really interesting set of conversations. I thought it would be interesting. It feels like we're in a sort of moment of incredible transformation where, and to your point, Andrew, about this imbalance between capital, land and labour, and how capital seems to have sort of taken the limelight and labour and land seem to have been left behind. We're sort of moving into I feel like a very new regime whereby we've got almost unlimited intelligence and labour now, even though it may not be human, and that's with AI, and plus with the an oncoming wave of robotics, which feels like it's sort of about five years out. But I'd be interested to get your thoughts on what Adam Smith would make of this sort of transformation, and I'm going to throw a couple of examples or one example at each of you, and maybe just to get you thinking. So, for example, you talked about speed of finance and what AI does to the speed of finance. It feels like it only accelerates. So that's one for you, Andrew. For you, Amanda, I was thinking more about, as robotics come into our homes, like, are we just going to see this massive unlock of this sort of caring industry that's gone unpaid? Does it just filter back into the economy now? Or what happens to our society and our GDP and our economies if all of a sudden we're not sort of having to like hoover and do fold up clothing or whatever? And Keza, to you, my thinking was more like, are we moving into a regime away from passive investment now, because it is going to disrupt everything? And if you're a passive investor, you're just the dumb money on the sitting around investing in the legacy stuff. And actually, all that legacy stuff is just going to get upended because AI is just going to like turn everything upside down. So a few thoughts for each of you.
What a nice question.
Nice question, but 1.5 minutes each for you. Because
Well, less than that. You've sparked thoughts, and I'm going to have to think through what you're saying. I'm just approaching it from the point of view of agents, artificial intelligence agents. So I asked my agent to book the holiday and to piece it all together. But that comes down to regulation and trust, doesn't it? How do I know either it's an Apple agent and I trust Apple, like my phone, etc.? So I think Adam Smith would come at it from the point of view that Amanda was saying, what's the regulation about the marketplace? So if we're using AI agents, what's the regulation of those? Or is it a completely free market in the sense of an awful lot of money simply goes to Mr. Thiel because he's created the AI agent that we all use? Or actually, I haven't noticed it, but £100 a year is just being taken away from my bank accounts, and it is next to 1,000. I don't know. So regulation, I think, is the Adam Smith issue, and I'm just approaching it from the point of view of agents. But obviously, your question sparks a lot more than that.
Yes, robots in our homes. Well, if we have more free time, then that might make us a bit happier. And if we are happier, maybe our society will be a better place. So I only see it as a positive in terms of being able to help some of the sort of unpaid. I just think we need to be thinking about, from an economic point of view, not just basing our economic analysis on historic models. We should update them, we should evolve them, and we will need to continue to do that as innovation changes and provides more tools for us as people to run our lives differently.
Passive investing, I'm actually going to follow up with what Amanda said on this because I think this applies here. I personally have no idea how AI is going to affect my job. Half the people are telling me it's going to replace me. The other half is telling me it's going to make me the most efficient person in the world in terms of research. And to be honest, I don't know the answer because I don't know how it's going to impact financial markets, and I don't know how it's going to impact how investment process or even how market dynamics work at this point, because so much of the market mechanisms can be automated. But at what point do you integrate AI with human judgment and make those capital allocation decisions? I mean, you have algorithmic trading already, but I feel like maybe with more fundamental investing, I'm not sure where that use case is going to go, to be honest. So that's my honest answer.
I think it was about 1880 or so. Edison came out with the light bulb and distribution of light around a city. I mean, this is about 1880, and look what electricity was doing by 1930. Obviously, the timescale will be far shorter, but he had no idea what electricity would be doing in the 1930s.
Oh, but I will say, I
think...
So
it might be 15 years, but, vastly compressed time, I think.
But I think what I will say is the gap or the productivity or the performance of asset managers is going to be driven by how quickly and how well people integrate these AI models into into the business model or into their investment process. But there's so much that goes in there in terms of how do you manage data quality? How do you train the models? What is the differentiation between each asset manager and the models that they adopt? There's just a lot of factors there that I think we're just at the beginning of trying to build that ecosystem.
Okay, I see 4 hands. They've got 4 hands up. We're going to take
No speeches, just quick questions, one response from one person. So we're going to take this gentleman first here, please.
Thanks. The question's really for the two ladies, but in terms of the people who are left behind, you talked a lot about the riches, but is poverty essentially an externality of all the other market? So the market is thriving for many of us, but clearly as we make exchanges, there are some left behind. And then in order to correct that, I was thinking about a question that you had about ESG and other kinds of things. Is there ever a non-monetary kind of structure that would enable us as investors to decide to put our money somewhere that might do a better job of like eliminating poverty?
Absolute poverty has actually improved. I mean, people have been risen out of absolute poverty, which actually, from a people perspective, is a good thing. What has not improved is the gap between those who have and those who have not. So that absolute, extreme wealth versus people who are just trying to get by, and that is a problem, but also creates market opportunities, because if you can be a company that can help solve some of the problems, the access to education, healthcare, all these sorts of things, you've actually got quite a big customer base that you can appeal to. So again, it comes back to my point about innovation. I think we as the human race can be very innovative, and I would like to think that the majority don't want to see people suffering. And so we will hopefully innovate to help improve that gap between those who have the extreme wealth and those who have not. But we are talking about, 3 big companies with a massive passive index. We are talking about a concentrated number of people and companies that have so much more power than they used to, and that is a problem.
Sorry. Andrew, you talked earlier about how you think perhaps capital is overvalued in this in the world economy, and how land and labour are undervalued. And I think Amanda's obviously shown us that land is undervalued, but do you really think that's the case for labour? Because over the last 70 years, with the end of colonialism, which restricted huge numbers of people from improving their human capital, and then with that end of colonialism also caused chaos in huge numbers of countries, which once again dissuaded capital from going there. Do you not think that perhaps labour is overvalued now? Because in countries like ours, I would say about a third of the population does a job that could be perhaps as easily done by someone from a third world country who didn't have the opportunities. And even for the upper two-thirds of jobs, the only reason people in this country are able to get a university education better than most people in the global south is just because the capital is here, the universities are here, and we discriminate against foreign students when applying to this country. So do you actually think that capital is overvalued in this economy, or would you say perhaps that it's labour that's overvalued in this economy, especially when thinking about Britain, we have finance is one of our biggest industries?
I think in most Western countries you find small blocks of people who in effect put up moats and barriers, lawyers being a prime example, because I'm not a lawyer, certainly not economists, who manage to in effect take more than their fair share of the profit that's developed. But I think increasingly, and it comes back to your question, sir, about technology, the vast majority of the population, I think, are finding that their ability to create a productive income is just getting more and more difficult. And I think that comes down to a combination of capital and technology. Let's talk about it more over drinks.
Connected to that, it's worth remembering 40% of people on universal credit in Scotland are in work, so the government is subsidising low wages. That wasn't my question. If Adam Smith was alive today, would he sue the Adam Smith Institute for defamation?
Yeah, okay, everybody gets to answer that.
That's a rhetorical question, and you know the answer.
Amanda, why are you voting? Do you think he'd sue them?
I think he might be quite shocked at where we are. I'm not about. Does he know about suing people and lawyers? He'd have to be educated first.
No comment.
No comment.
No comment. I'm still in the industry, guys.
You can't say anything like that. Okay, well, look, it's been a wonderful, wonderful evening, and we did Oh, Robbie, do you want to say something? Okay, be super quick, and then I'm going to sum up. Okay, super quick.
Yes, it's just one thing that we would like you to do. We have enjoyed this series of conversations, setting up this series of conversations very much. We've enjoyed the conversation last night and tonight. And what we would like to do is to carry on. So around the room in various places, you'll see blank forms. We're taking the Enlightenment view, which is that we don't just think of questions ourselves and then pose them to clever people. We want to get this to be an ongoing discussion, responding to questions which are interesting to you. So if you take one of these forms, you fill out the question, if you hand it to me or David or Lewis at the end, then I'm quite certain that sooner or later you'll find that we're able to table something on it. So we want to keep the discussion going. We've already had ideas. We need to talk about AI. We need to talk about housing. We want to expand that discussion as much as possible, and particularly we want to do it in June, round about the 5th of June, which was Adam Smith's birthday. Thank you very much.
Nice and quick. Okay, I'm going to sum up really quickly just to tell you, we've got 3 more of these evenings, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. There's tickets still available for all of them. We've got a gentleman coming in, I can't quite remember his name, but he's coming in next week. He's the gentleman that went out whenever companies got into debt. He advised them from a legal viewpoint on that, and that's an event next week. And then we've got another event the week after that. I can't remember what it is, but it's going to be just as brilliant. Can I just say that we talked about wealth there, didn't we? Is there any greater wealth than sitting in a room like this, all of us together, hearing 3 wonderful speakers sharing these ideas? And one way you can contribute to the wealth of the Library of Mistakes is by bringing your glasses down and everything to the back at the end as well. Can I ask you all to thank our speakers? Thank you very much for coming.